אנו מכריזים בזאת
Operation Diamond. People should know the story of the Israeli Air Force. At the creation of the State of Israel, we barely had an army with guns, let alone planes. A lot of smuggling was going on in order to create an air force. The first plane flown by a nascent Israeli Air Force was the German Messerschmitt, made in Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was an ally of the new nation state and provided us with Messerschmitts. Later came the British Spitfire. This was before Israel was able to obtain American planes headed by the Phantom. But the Arab armies were far better equipped than the Israeli army, particularly in planes. And in many air battles, the Israeli pilots, and those pilots, by the way, were initially volunteer pilots who came in from countries like Canada, the United States, and South Africa, and helped also train the Israeli pilots at the nascent time of the 1948, 1949. But later on, often the Israeli pilots came off worse against the approving Russian fighter jets. Israel needed to understand what made the Russian MiGs such a danger to our pilots. And this is where the role of the Mossad comes in. And to help me in this story, I want to introduce our special guest. My name is Barry Shaw, first of all, and this is The View from Israel. Avner Avraham, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Avner has been 20 years in the Mossad as a Mossad agent. He's a creator of the Mossad archives and the Mossad museum. And I've asked Avner to come onto the show to talk about Operation Diamond. Avner, how did Operation Diamond come about?
Okay, so we spoke in a different video about the capture of Adolf Eichmann, and the chief of Mossad was Israel. But 3 years after, on 63, he decided to resign from Mossad, and the prime minister decided to take the chief of the intelligence in the IDF, Meir Amit, and ask him to be also, in the same time, also the chief of Mossad. So for almost a year, he was the chief of the intelligence in the IDF, and he was the chief in the Mossad, Meir Amit. And he was very close to the other major generals, like the chief of the Israeli Air Force, Ezer Weizmann, a famous family we all know started from Chaim Weizmann, and he, after years, also became the president of Israel. But he was a pilot, he was the chief of the Israeli Air Force, and he used to meet the chief of Mossad every month for a breakfast. And Meir Amit asked him if he needed something special for the Israeli Air Force, and he told him, you know what? The Russian got the MiG-21. It's the new MiG. We don't know anything about this war machine. And all the enemies surround Israel got this MiG, especially Syria and Egypt, that were the biggest enemy of Israel. And he told him, you know what, if you can bring here to Israel a MiG-21, it will be great for us. After the breakfast between the chief of Mossad and Ezer Weizmann, that was the head of the Israeli Air Force, Meir Amit came to the Mossad headquarters, and he asked the agents to come with the idea, how can we find a MiG-21? So at the beginning, they thought about Egypt or Syria, because we share border with two these Arab countries. But the solution came from Iraq. Even if Iraq is far away, the Mossad got in the 60s and the 70s a big headquarters in Iran and the great connections with the Iranian. And many agents work in Tehran, and they used to go to Iraq and Arab countries and come back and report in Tehran. So the headquarters in Tehran got the mission to find a pilot. And one of the agents came with the name Monir Ratfa. Monir Ratfa was Iraqi pilot, and he was Christian. And as we know, most of the people in Iraq, Muslims. So because he was a Christian, he suffered a lot. He was captain for many years. The family suffered in the neighborhood. The kids suffered in the school. And he decided to escape and to leave Iraq. And this information came to the head of Mossad, and he decided to help him to come for a medical care in Europe. So the pilot flew to Europe and met in Rome a few Mossad agents. And the Mossad also brought a navigator, Yuda Porat, from the Israeli Air Force. And he was an Israeli navigator, but also he was born in Cairo, and he could speak also Arabic. And he spent 24 hours with the pilot, questioned him about the MiG, and he came back to the Mossad and told them, this is a real pilot, and he really wants to escape. I understand him. We became close friends. And the only problem is that he used the MiG-21, and we have to, he used the MiG-17, and we need to ask him to move, to request and to move to the MiG-21. It was the best MiG at that time in Iraq. And in the meantime, during the weekend, the Mossad asked the navigator to stop the meetings with the Iraqi pilot, and the Mossad smuggled the Iraqi pilot to Israel for 24 hours. He landed in Israel with the Israeli fake passports. The Mossad agents took him to a nice restaurant in the center of Israel in Ramat HaSharon, and he met people, high-rank officers, including Shaike Bareket. Shaike Bareket was a pilot, and he was also in charge of the intelligence in the Israeli Air Force. And together with Shaike, they took a small plane that's used for to study and to teach, and they asked him to show and to take off. And the Iraqi pilot took off with a small jet, and they show him exactly the way that he need to land and the location. It was the Israeli Chatzor, the Israeli Air Force base named Chatzor. And the Mossad also taught him how to communicate with the secret ink, secret letters. He can send letters to Europe, and from Europe, the Mossad will communicate with him. And they also gave him a special code. They told him that the green light to take off from Baghdad will be a special, unique song that they will play in the Israeli National Arabic Radio. The name of the song is Marhabten, Marhabten in Arabic. If you translate it to English, it's welcome, welcome. And he flew back to Baghdad, and he asked to move to the MiG-21 unit, and he became a pilot in this special unit. And of course, the Mossad promised him to smuggle the whole family, the wife and the two kids, and also a few family members. And the Mossad smuggled them to Europe a few days before he flew to Israel. He got 3 different days in August 1966. It was August 14, 15, and 16. And then in the day of August 14, he opened the radio and he could listen after the 7 a.m. news in the morning. He could hear the song, and he flew to Israel, but he got a problem with the engine and he needed to fly back to the Iraqi military base. And also he got a problem the day after, and only in the third option, on August 16, he flew to Israel and he landed in Chatzor, the Israeli Air Force base. We can see the picture of Chatzor here. And also the special song, the Mossad agents, when they came to the radio station, they came a few months before to make sure that they don't have this record in the library of music. And he landed in Israel, and the Mossad took him with the helicopter to the center of Israel, to north of Tel Aviv. They brought him to the Mossad headquarters, and he met the family, the wife and the two kids.
Tell me, going back to prior to his arrival, the story that you had about the instructions that went out by the Mossad to make sure that nobody shot down an incoming MiG, because after all, MiG is an enemy plane.
Yes, so you know, we have the classified. I mean, we have the secrets in the Mossad, but we also have different departments, and people don't know anything about the other departments. And also in the IDF and the Israeli Air Force, they didn't want that the Israeli Air Force officers will know about this operation. So the Mossad made a fake letter written by Iraqi pilot that he decided to escape and to land in Israel. And they made this letter with special papers that they smuggled from Iraq, and they also used a typing machine. And they made copies of this letter and sent to all the Israeli Air Force bases. And they really thought in the Israeli Air Force that this is a real letter from a pilot that planning to land. And the problem was that even Ran Pecker, that was the chief of the Mirage unit, he didn't know that he didn't know about this operation, and he was the one that waiting for the MiG, and he took off. And the chief of the Israeli Air Force told him, "Don't touch him, just follow him and help him to land." And the pilot landed in Israel.
You had another story about the operation was nearly aborted because of a burst tire, Mivtza MiG, something like that.
Yeah, but this happened later when we have maybe one of the biggest hero in this operation is Danny Shapira. He was a test pilot, and Danny Shapira was the one that started to fly with the MiG-21. And the Iraqi pilot amazed how come the Israelis can take this plane and after 48 hours they can took off with this. And he told Danny Shapira, "Are you crazy? You need a few months to learn about this plane." He said, "No, it's okay, don't worry. Just show me everything inside the plane." They also asked one of the soldiers that work in the Chatzor military base that originally came from Russia, and he could read the Russian letters, they asked him to translate all the everything inside the cockpit. And Danny Shapira took off a few times with the MiG, but after 4 or 5 times, he needed to change the tires. And the IDF asked the Mossad to find tires and to send the agents all over the world to find tires for MiG-21. And they found in anonymous country a storage place with full of these tires, and they just took 50 tires and smuggled them to Israel. And it was enough to learn and to use the MiG and to teach all the Israeli pilots how to fight against this plan.
Yes, I want to also emphasize to you, the viewers, that this wasn't like Israel ordering 50 tires for a MiG-21 plane. This was another special Mossad operation. In fact, Abner, you remember, we did a previous video on the Entebbe raid, and this became also a Hollywood movie. And the Mossad seems to attract Hollywood because we have pictures here of James Bond himself, Sean Connery, arriving at the Chatzor Air Base to meet Moti Hard, who was the chief of the Israeli Air Force when he arrived, and visited the MiG in the hangar, by which time the Israeli Air Force had changed the decoration on the outside of the MiG-21 with a logo 007. You know, but I understand you also were the equivalent of Q in the James Bond story. Tell me how.
When I joined the Mossad, I made things similar to Q, to produce special gadgets for the agents, and also from time to time to fly and to try to use it. And if we are talking about the 007, if you go today to the Israeli Air Force Museum near Beersheba in south of Israel, you will see the original MiG with the red color and with the 007. So the 007, they made it when they brought it to the museum, but the red lines that you can see on the plane today, they use it for a training plane. And think about a real enemy MiG that coming to Israel and try to bomb, and you need to find a way to make a big difference that you can see from far between enemy MiG and our special MiG that we use for teaching the pilots.
Tell me the story about the pilot himself. I understand he didn't remain in Israel as his wife was unhappy here, couldn't find a place in Israel.
Okay, so the family, the Mossad gave a nice apartment in the north of Tel Aviv to the family, and they asked them not to talk about Iraq at all, and they asked him to say that they came from Iran and they are a Jewish family. And they asked the wife not to go to the church. And one day when the Mossad agents came to meet the family, it was Sunday morning, they couldn't find the family, and some of friends saw them in a church, in a big church in Jaffa. So it was very difficult, especially for the wife. And I think the reason was the fact that he didn't tell her that they are going to escape to Israel. She knew that they are going to escape and to get out Iraq. And Israel was the biggest enemy for the Iraqian. And so think about, it's like you take an Israeli Air Force pilot and he want to escape from Israel and he need to land in Tehran, and his wife don't know anything about landing in Tehran. Okay, so this is, I think, can be a good example. So after 2 years, they decided that they don't want to stay anymore in Israel. It's important to say that the Mossad, even today, helping the family. So they gave him a fake passports and identity, and they got new life, new face in a different place. Unfortunately, the pilot passed away very young from a heart attack, and his wife also a few years after. And the two kids, the boy and the girl, became a man and woman, both of them living in the middle of a country that I cannot mention. Actually, I don't know the location, and it's better. And this is actually the story of the family, but it's important. It's important to say that the Mossad, when he promised something, he do it. He could avoid the pilot and when they got the plane, but they, like in the other operations, when they promise something, they do it, and it's also important for the future. And maybe you can you wonder how come, what is the connection between Vietnam and the MiG-21?
Go ahead.
Yes. So of course the CIA and the U.S. Army asked to come to Israel, and they also asked to take with them the MiG-21. So after a few months, the Mossad sent this MiG-21 to the United States, and they also sent Danny Shapira. He came to the USA and he taught the pilots how to fight against the MiG-21. He taught them about all the weaknesses in this Russian MiG. And it was a huge help for them and saved life for many pilots in the war in Vietnam.
I think that's a very interesting point, because I make this on other occasions, and it's useful for our American viewers to understand this. This is just one example of how Israeli intelligence has helped save American lives, because the capture of this MiG aircraft and the intelligence we received with it was passed over to our greatest ally, the United States, in order that they could use it in their military and train their pilots how to outmaneuver and the Russian fighter plane, the MiG-21. But turning onto something else, I understand that you have a story about. I only learned it the other day about you. You participated at Camp David, if we're talking about peace and America, and this time with the Palestinians. I understand that you were there at Camp David when Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat met with President Clinton in order to thrash out the Oslo Accords. Tell me about it as much as you can about your role there.
Well, I think the only connection between this is the fact that we landed in U.S. Air Force bases, but there is not connection between the stories. It's just part of my life. I was there, and I also was the last Mossad agent that flew with the Yitzhak Rabin to New York 2 weeks before the murder. But this is something different that I cannot talk about. But I can talk about a big exhibit that I made for the Diamond operation. And usually when I'm doing a big exhibit, I'm looking for something big to bring with me, like the Mercedes, the real Mercedes from Entebbe. And in this case, in the diamond operation, I tried to find a MiG. Now, I tried with the museum in Be'er Sheva, and the Israel Air Force didn't want to give me the MiG-21 for exhibit. I mean, it sounds crazy that Mossad agent come and say, "Can you give me this MiG-21 for 1 month?" Maybe they knew that if the Mossad take the MiG, he will leave it in the Mossad headquarters. So anyway, I found a MiG in Israel that belonged to the Ugandan Air Force. And I needed to ask a permission from the president of Uganda. And we got the permission to use it because it was all MiG, and they didn't actually, they sent the MiGs to upgrade them in Israel, but they decided not to use MiG in Uganda, and they didn't pay the bill. So it was there for more than 15 years. But anyway, I asked the chief of Mossad if we can, if we have a MiG, can we bring the MiG to the Mossad headquarters? And he told me, "Look, you are really crazy, but I like your creativity. But at the end of the day, it's not enough to bring the MiG. You know, you need to take care about it. You need to connect it with the special equipment, and it was too expensive for the Mossad. So we decided not to do anything with the real MiG, and we just found in the Far East a plastic MiG, and it was the part of the exhibit. It's really one of the biggest Mossad operations because this operation was on 1966, but a year after, you remember the Six-Day Wars, and on 67, and it was a huge help for the IDF, the fact that all the Israeli pilots could fight the MiG-21, and it was part of the big success. We have it also in our medal that we made. We can see in the medal, in the front of the medal, we can see the MiG today with the 007. And in the back side, we can see the MiG when he landed in Israel with the Iraqi flag and all the unit numbers, the Iraqi unit numbers.
But coming on to the other thing, you were the creator of Spy Legends. Tell us a little bit to wrap up about Spy Legends and how people can contact you.
So Spy Legends, as I told you, spylegends.com is the name, is the domain name. It's the biggest speakers bureau in Israel that deal with security and intelligence. We have hundreds of speakers, keynote speakers. We have major generals. We have former ministers. We have, for example, a former chief of Shin Bet. Shin Bet is like the FBI. We have Mossad agents. We have high-rank officers, special units. We have people from former police officers. We have also professors from universities, expert in the Middle East. And we also represent, if you, of course, remember Uri Geller, the mentalist, Leo Suchard, because there is a connection between mentalists and magicians and spy. It all goes together. But the special thing in our agency is the fact that we have speakers from all over the world. We also have a former CIA and FBI agents. We have people that can speak almost 20 different languages. And it's not only about lectures in person or in Zoom. We also consult spy movies. We consult spy and Jewish museums, Holocaust museum, and we sell books that related to spy legends. We sell medals and everything that is around the spy world. We try to put together everything in spylegends.com.
Well, again, if anybody who heads organizations abroad in various countries would like to have some of the Spy Legends speakers talk at your events or even have an exhibition, go to spylegends.com. Avner, thank you for being my guest on this show. Thank you for being with me. I hope to be able to interview you in the future about other fascinating stories connected with the Mossad. Thank you for all you do.
Yeah, it will be, this is the third program, and I would like to thank you. I think that it's not too late to become agent, even if your age, you have a lot of knowledge, even now after the 3 programs, but I can tell you that in our next program, we will talk about smuggling Jews to Israel, a special unit that in Mossad that smuggle Jews from Arab countries and even from Ethiopia to Israel in our next program.
Well, I have to tell you that actually I am an agent, but not covert agent. I do it more overtly, so I don't know if that passes the test. But Avner, thank you very much for being my guest. Viewers, if you like this video, press the like button, share it with others, and press subscribe if you want to receive further videos from The View from Israel. Thank you. Barry Shaw, The View from Israel.
אנו מכריזים בזאת